This is the Mining Boom Big Show for our Settling the West unit. When we're talking about a mining boom, we're talking about an economic boom. And a boom refers to any time of rapid economic growth. And I mean, this is when lots of people get much richer much more quickly. And so a mining boom would be a time of rapid economic growth caused by discovery and mining of minerals and precious metals like gold and silver and copper. Well, what we're really talking about here is, in our Settling the West unit, is why a whole bunch of people decided in the second half of the 1800s to move to the American West. I'm talking about areas west of places like Iowa. Why did so many people want to go west? And I'm not talking about the Oregon Trail like from the 1840s where people moved to the Oregon coast, which really wasn't a significant number of people compared to what we're going to talk about here. I'm talking about in real terms why states like Colorado would be formed, and Nevada and Arizona and Kansas and Nebraska, which had already become states, but why more people moved there, or the Dakotas or Wyoming or Montana, why these places became states, and why major cities were developed in this place. There had to be a reason why this area was settled. And there were people living there before all this time, but they would be like the Native Americans, who lived a nomadic lifestyle, much in contrast to American civilization. So this whole unit's focusing on that. And we're beginning by looking at mining as a reason why people moved to the American West. So we're looking at the Rocky Mountains here. And there's a reason where we're looking at this picture. Gold can be found, for example, all over the earth, but it's a heavy element, and it tends to be very deep. You might be able to find gold in Iowa if you could dig deeply enough, but you can't dig deeply enough to find it. You would have to go too deep. It's not even possible to go where the gold would be. However, if you have an area where what was down deep is now pushed up high to the surface, like in the Rocky Mountains, there you might be able to find gold and precious metals. And so you are much more likely to find things like gold in a mountainous region because they were formed through plate tectonics. What was down deep is now thrust up. And that's what we see here. So it was just a matter of time, and people had been finding gold in the Rocky Mountains for centuries. And I'm talking about the native peoples who lived there, but not to any large degree. So the first thing that would spark the boom, the first area we're going to look at is Pikes Peak. And this was the discovery of gold near Denver, Colorado, and Pikes Peak. And if you may have been to Pikes Peak, it's about 14,000 feet high. It's a major mountain outside of Denver, Colorado. It led to a major gold rush in Colorado. There's a lot of gold there. There was in Colorado, and a lot of other natural minerals to be found there. And this helped bring people to Colorado. And in turn, it led to Denver becoming a major city because it became a mining town that supplied not just the Pikes Peak gold rush, but all the type of mining and prosperous area and people looking to extract minerals out of Colorado in and around that area. And they used their base of operation to be Denver. And that's the reason why Denver became a major city that it is today. The next area we're going to look at is known as the Comstock lode. A lode is a deposit of some mineral, in this case silver, and the Comstock lode was located in Nevada, and it's a major reason why not just Nevada became a state and area where people moved to, but also San Francisco and the whole of Northern California becoming more prosperous as they supplied the resources necessary for first miners and then mining companies to extract this mineral from Nevada. Arizona extracted somewhere upwards of $85 million worth of silver between 1877 and 1890, and it's one of the major reasons why people moved to Arizona in large numbers at that time. We're going to look at the gold rush in northwest Canada, the Klondike. 100,000 Americans moved there in 1896 after gold was discovered. And 3 years later in Nome, Alaska, the gold rush in Alaska would take off, and they would eventually extract 112 tons of gold over a 10-year period of time. Thousands and thousands of Americans moved to Alaska on the prospect of getting rich. And the last area we want to talk about today would be the Black Hills of South Dakota. Black Hills are located in the southwest corner of South Dakota. They're near the Badlands. This is an area that no American really wanted any part of. And in fact, before 1874, only the Sioux Nation, the Native Americans, were kind of pushed to that area to live until gold was discovered there. And then thousands of prospectors who had violated a treaty that the Americans had with the Sioux Nation went into that area to extract gold. So life in these mining communities had a few things in common. First of all, there'd be a wide variety of people. And whenever you have a wide variety of people, invariably you're going to have discrimination come up because people don't. There's that certain tribalism where people don't like people who are different than them. And when you have that discrimination, you're going to have violence, especially when you take in the fact that there's no real law enforcement. There aren't any. Not only were these places not cities yet, some of these places, there weren't even states yet. These were territories that hadn't even been formed as states. And so thousands of people just moved there very quickly, and there was no police force, and they formed what eventually would be known as vigilante committees, where they took care of the violence themselves. So as I said, they drew settlers from all over the world, South America, Asia, and Europe, and from all over the United States. And because of this intense competition to get rich, and remember, they're all there to get rich, and there's many more people there than there are resources to get rich. This competition within mining communities led to harsh treatment of immigrant groups, in particular the two groups that are pictured here, the Chinese immigrants and immigrants who came from Ireland. There are a lot of Irish who came in this time, in the second half of the 1800s, to do mining work, and both groups suffered from a lot of discrimination. Well, when you have lots of people in a relatively small area, and there's no law enforcement, and there's lots of competition, you're going to have violence. And when there's no police force, the vigilante communities would solve their violence with violence. They would typically go to hanging to solve their disputes. And this was a poster posted by a vigilante community outside of a town in a mining community in the American West. Warning, notice is given that any person found pilfering, stealing, robbing, or committing any act of lawless violence will be summarily hanged. There is no trial. If you are found or believed to be stealing or robbing or any act of lawless violence, you're going to be hanged. And that's a key to vigilante committees. This isn't about bringing people to trial. This is about what they thought would be to right or wrong. Only this is outside of the law, because there is no law. Well, eventually it was time for big business to move in. The gold, the silver, the precious metals that were easy to extract by individuals was found very quickly. There are still a lot of resources there. There still is today. There are resources there. But it takes the money, the capital of the big business to come in to extract it. One technique they used was known as hydraulic mining, and the word hydraulic, of course, refers to water. They would have water shot at high pressure that would blast the side of a mountain and strip away all the dirt and all the rocks and everything and leave just the precious metals. And this, of course, would devastate the environment, and all of this soil they would displace would choke the rivers and cause massive flooding downstreams. But they were able to extract and get a lot of metals from that, and they would get rich from it, even though they destroyed the environment. This would be what you would typically think of mining today is called hard rock mining. They would sink a deep shaft underground to obtain minerals locked in rocks underground, and it's still done today, obviously. But there are dangers to this. As you can see these guys here doing hard rock mining, you would run the danger of cave-ins and explosions and temperatures reaching up to 150 degrees, poor ventilation, and it'd cause all kinds of respiratory illness. But again, it was effective, and it took a lot of capital that companies would bring in to construct these massive mines and to pay the workers to do it, but it was profitable for companies. Now, the big mining companies brought a couple things in. First of all, they brought order and stability to mining communities. It wasn't good business to have lawless violence and to have vigilante communities set up in a community where they're trying to run this massive mining operation. They wanted order and they wanted stability. So they would bring in their own police force. They would set up city governments. They would set up schools and churches, and they would apply for statehood because it was better for business to have stability and order in their communities. They did not want the chaos and lawlessness of vigilante committees. In addition to the stability they brought in, they also brought in a lot of immigrants, especially from China. They brought a lot of immigrants in because the Chinese were willing to work for lower wages and not belong to unions. Now, in addition to the reason why the Chinese were willing to work for such low wages is because it was more than they were making at home. And a very low wage is better than zero wage. A little bit of money is better than no money. There is one interesting twist to this whole story, and these big mining companies would often support politicians who made laws making it more difficult for Chinese to come to the United States. This is a campaign poster from the 11th Senatorial District in California, and you can see they wanted to, the Chinese must go, the Working Men's Party of California. So this candidate, this politician was supporting keeping Chinese out. Interestingly enough, the big companies would often support politicians who wanted to keep Chinese out of the United States. And in fact, in 1881, they would pass the Chinese Exclusion Act, and they would forbid all Chinese from coming into the United States. Now, you may ask yourself, why would the big companies want to have a policy, have a law passed that would bar the workers that they were using to come into the country? Well, when you know a little bit more, the answer actually is it's easy to understand. After the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed by politicians who the big mining companies supported and gave money to their campaigns, after that law was passed, Chinese still came in the country. Big mining companies would go to the port authorities in places like Seattle and Portland and in California, and they would bribe the officials to allow Chinese immigrants to come in illegally. And then they would go immediately to work for the big mining companies. And the reason they would do that is because they could pay them even less than they were paying them before. And they would say, if they complained, well, you're here illegally. So it provided a way for the Chinese to still get paid a little bit, and so they would still want to come because it was still more than they were making at home where they may be starving. But they were treated very poorly by the big mining companies who encouraged the illegal immigration that they helped to make illegal by supporting the politicians who voted for the law. You will find, if you do some research about some of the immigration in the United States today, you will find where some big companies still bring in illegal workers who they, in all probability, know are here illegally, but are able to pay them very low wages because of it. So as we conclude here, one of the reasons why lots and lots of people moved to the American West who would eventually come into conflict with Native Americans of that time period, living their nomadic lifestyle, the reason why so many Americans would want to go there, one of the reasons was because of mining. Because mining provided an opportunity for people to get rich, and probably get rich very quickly. If you have any questions over this material, I'll be happy to answer them for you.